Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining. My name is Luke Metzger. I'm the Executive Director of Environment Texas Research and Policy Center. We're a nonprofit that conducts research, policy analysis, and does public education to protect Texas's air, water, and open spaces. And we were proud to have helped play a leading role in 2023 in the creation of the $1 billion Centennial Parks Conservation Fund to help protect Texas open spaces and natural areas. Today, we're releasing a new report, a joint report together with Frontier Group that's called Protecting the Nature of Texas, Powering Our Clean Energy Future, Smart Renewable Energy Siting and Operations in the Lone Star State. Texas has beautiful prairies, hills, and other open spaces, but they're getting increasingly transformed by sprawl for data centers and energy development. When we do need more energy, wind and solar should be central to meeting it. They deliver power without the air pollution and heavy water use of fossil fuels. Most of that renewable energy buildup that's happening is on private land, where ranches and farm families have stewarded those lands for generations. And that income, often from leasing their land for renewable energy development, often helps them keep that land intact rather than selling it off to be subdivided into ranchettes. Thanks to those landowners, entrepreneurs, and energy companies, Texas has become a clean energy powerhouse. And that's great news for our air, our water, and our climate. But we can't just build renewables anywhere, anyhow. While their impact is less than that of fossil fuels, wind and solar power can still have impacts, and we need to make sure that they're built the right way. The good news is that many Texas developers are already showing how to do it right. And now state policymakers should make sure that any new rules support that responsible approach rather than blocking clean energy altogether. Banning renewables doesn't protect our environment. It means more pollution, more water strain, and it undermines those landowners that depend on that income to keep their land intact. What we need instead are clear, science-based, statewide standards on siting and mitigation. So to dig into this, I'm joined by a great lineup of speakers. And to kick us off, I'm going to introduce one of the co-authors of the report, Quentin Good, a policy analyst with Frontier Group. Quentin?
Hello, everyone. Pleasure to be here. My name is Quentin Good. Luke, if you could go to the next slide. I'm a policy analyst with Frontier Group, and I am based in Denver, Colorado, where I live with my dog, Cooper. And as Luke mentioned, I am one of the authors of this report. I'm going to kick us off today just by providing a little bit of an overview of renewable energy in Texas and how it's helped deliver cleaner air and water for the state. Um, as a lot of you are probably aware, Texas is a major, not only national, but international leader in renewable energy. In the United States, Texas is number one for wind and number two for solar and battery storage. And we've experienced a lot of growth in renewable energy in Texas over the last 10 years. Wind and solar supplied 30% of the electricity consumed in 2025, and that was up from 15% in 2016. And on some days, in fact, renewable energy is able to provide more than 50% of Texas's electricity needs. And this has really helped reduce air and water pollution and water use from fossil fuel production and use. So, for example, sulfur dioxide emissions from Texas power plants went down by 50%, and greenhouse gases went down by 11%. Between 2018 and 2023, even as the electricity consumption in the state was growing. So that's great for Texas. In addition, the boom in battery capacity and storage has really helped store that electricity for when we need it the most and is helping Texas weather serious winter storms or just weather events in the summer and adding resilience to the grid and preventing those system-wide outages. So all in all, the the massive amount of renewable energy and battery storage in Texas is really helping deliver cleaner air and water. Slide. And again, this is because it's helping Texas move away from some of the harmful impacts of fossil fuel production and use. Renewables do have real environmental impacts, but as we're going to discuss a lot today, those are manageable and can be reduced. And those impacts are dwarfed by the damage from fossil fuel production and use. So, really, to have cleaner air and water in Texas, we need more renewables, not less. In Texas, more than 5 million. I can go back 1 second. If you could go back to the last slide, I had a few more points there.
Sorry
Sorry.
about that. Let me
That's
get
okay.
back real quick. Yeah, sorry about that. Had a trigger finger.
So more than 5 million Texans actually live within half a mile of an active oil and gas well. And research has shown that living nearby active oil and gas wells uh, is associated with elevated risk of childhood leukemia and decreased lung function. So, a lot of Texans' health is at risk from living near active wells. In addition, there are a host of other impacts of oil and gas production. There are more than 11,000 orphaned wells statewide. There are many, many storage wells that can leak into nearby water supplies and even blow out. There's also the practice of flaring, which is burning off excess methane, which is releasing sulfur, methane, nitrogen oxides, and volatile organic compounds into the air and contributing to ozone formation. All of these types of pollution are particularly harmful to folks with pre-existing respiratory conditions or children or the elderly or people who are pregnant. And so, again, although renewables have real impacts, those are manageable, and they pale in comparison to the sort of inherent pollution that's caused by fossil fuel production. So we can go to the next slide. And really, the important thing is that as we embrace renewable energy, we make sure that it's also environmentally friendly and protects wildlife. And there are a lot of proven ways that we can do that. And thankfully, our panel of experts here will help us understand those methods. So, to cover wind energy and their impacts on birds and bats, we have Lisa Gonzalez from Audubon, Texas, who's going to tell us about some of those strategies. We'll also talk about solar land management and co-location strategies, sort of also known as agrivoltaics. And we'll hear from Garrett Bader from American Farmland Trust and Cyrus Reed from Sierra Club. And then we'll dig in a little bit as well on offshore wind with Stacy Ortego from the National Wildlife Federation. And with that, I will pass it off to Lisa. Thanks.
Oh, thank you so much, Quentin, and congratulations on a great report. Really excited to be here with all of you today in this great group of panelists. Thank you so much for joining us. So, as Quentin mentioned, my name is Lisa Gonzalez. I'm the Vice President and Executive Director for Audubon, Texas. We're the state office of the National Audubon Society. And today I wanted to talk to you about something that might seem like a contradiction in terms for those of us that work on bird, bat, and similar species and habitat conservation efforts in Texas, but the growth of clean energy and specifically wind power in Texas. We can do this while we're also protecting birds, bats, and the habitats that we all care about. The good news is it's not a contradiction, and as Quentin said a few minutes ago, it's a solvable challenge. I think one of the things I wanted to start also by saying is that it's really important to know that Texas is not a side note in this story. Texas is at the center of this work in the country. We're the nation's top wind energy producer, as Quentin said, and we sit in the middle of the Central Flyway. I've got a migration map behind me from our Bird Migration Explorer at Audubon. And so you can see Texas is just right here in the heart of it. We're one of the busiest migration corridors on the continent, and that means that the choices that we make here in Texas carry real weight for both clean energy and bird conservation internationally. Next slide, please. So I wanted to start with why this matters. What you're seeing here is a graphic from the 2025 State of the Birds report. It confirmed what many of us are already seeing in our communities around the state, that bird populations across the US are declining rapidly and largely driven by habitat loss. Next slide, please. And for us at Audubon, one of the things we think about is climate change. Climate change is something that we call a threat multiplier. It makes impacts from stressors like habitat loss even worse. Our science at Audubon shows that 2/3 of North American bird species are at risk of extinction unless we take action to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and slow the rise of global temperatures. For us in Texas, extreme weather, relative sea level rise, shifting seasons. These impacts of climate change are already reshaping the ecosystems that birds and other wildlife rely upon. So to us, doing nothing is not a neutral choice. It actually accelerates the crisis. And if you can click one more time, Luke. These little graphics right here show the species that we're thinking a lot about in Texas when it comes to climate vulnerability, from water birds to grassland species, eastern forest birds, and coastal species as well. Why Audubon supports responsibly developed land-based wind energy. Climate change, as I said, is one of the single greatest long-term threats to birds. So shifting towards clean power is at the solution of this work, but it's also how we build clean energy that matters enormously to birds, bats, and the habitats that they depend upon, as well as the communities that sit alongside these projects. As demand for energy keeps growing, including right here in Texas, we have a real opportunity to do this work and to develop these clean energy resources very thoughtfully rather than reactively later on. So this is a real moment in time and an opportunity for us to get this right. Next slide, please. One of the things I wanted to start with, and this comes up a lot, and it's one of the first questions that people have about wind energy, is the discussion of mortality and collisions. It's a fair concern, and I wanted to share some numbers that put it into context. As you can see from the red circles on this graph, we've got some large bars on the left side of the screen that show causes of mortality such as cats and building collisions with glass. And on the right, we have collisions with wind turbines. The data from agencies such as U.S. Fish and Wildlife, from a number of nonprofit organizations and researchers that do this work, show that human-caused bird deaths each year are 1 to 4 orders of magnitude lower for wind turbines than for the mortalities that are related to cats. Collisions with buildings, power lines, fossil fuel infrastructure, cars, communications towers. To be clear, it's not a reason to ignore the impact, but for us at Audubon, it's a reason to focus our attention where it matters most. When we're thinking about birds and wind collisions, we're thinking of specific species such as raptors, golden eagles, and specific geographies where they may be sensitive to these types of infrastructure. Next slide, please. We're a bird conservation organization, but bats are also another group of species that come up a lot in conversations around wind in Texas. More than 75% of the bat carcasses that are found at wind facilities are Mexican free-tailed bats. They and migratory tree roosting species such as hoary bats are of conservation concern when it comes to wind energy. But interestingly, some research in 2024, and I've got some citations there at the bottom of the slide, but research from USGS shows that there are some zones in Texas, in Oklahoma, in Kansas, places with strong wind potential that at certain times of the year, especially winter and spring, where we have low bat habitat overlap. And again, it's just showing that there are solutions that we can look to to reduce impacts to these species. Next slide, please. For us, responsible wind development is at the heart of the work that we do every day alongside responsibly sited solar development as well. And to us, what that means is smart siting, using best practices and advanced mapping to steer projects away from sensitive habitats and towards what we call low conflict areas before a shovel ever hits the ground. We think it's really important that developers work with agencies and engage in agency consultations in Texas. That means working with Texas Parks and Wildlife. That's a voluntary consultation that developers can enter into. U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is another agency that consults with clean energy developers. I've got some examples here on the right side that show some technologies that can help us reduce harm. There are increasingly a number of technologies out there. For any birders in the audience, you know that image at the top is from Birdcast, and that's something that we use every migration season when we're out there looking for migratory species. But technologies such as radar, cameras, we've got a picture of the Identiflight system, cameras, increasingly AI systems that can help to identify species are being used to successfully operate wind fields so that we can curtail or slow and stop the movement of blades when species such as birds and bats are in the area. The Identiflight system, there's a great story out of Wyoming where its use at a wind farm reduced the mortality of eagles by 85%. So technology solutions are out there and increasingly being used. A couple of other points: conservation mitigation, extremely important. Every type of infrastructure that exists has an impact on birds and species. So when we cannot avoid the harm, we can work with developers and others to mitigate that harm. And that means putting money towards conservation projects and restoration projects that can help to restore nesting habitat and other important habitats that can help these species increase their numbers at population levels. And then we also can't forget, and I know there are others on the panel who are going to talk about this in greater detail, the benefits for people too, creating revenue for landowners to keep working lands working, and working in transparency with communities so that everyone shares on the upside of this work. Next slide, please. So in closing, I just want to restate how important Texas is in this work, and that there are real solutions that we and others who are working in this space across the state are looking to put in place so that we can develop clean energy in Texas alongside the species that we all care about. Conservation and clean energy are not mutually exclusive, they're contradictory and can be done together. So I just shared some ideas in case you want to get more involved, some ways that you can get information from us through our quarterly newsletter. Put on your calendar March 9th. That's going to be our Austin Advocacy Day during the legislature, also doing some birding out there on the state capitol lawn. So we invite you to join this work through Audubon, through the partners who are engaged here, as well as our local chapters in your community. So thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Now I'd like to turn it over to Garrett Bader with American Farmland Trust.
Hey, thanks, Luke. Thanks, Lisa. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Garrett Bader. I am the Smart Solar Specialist for American Farmland Trust here in Texas. I've been with them for about 3 years and based out of San Antonio. Excited to be here and for this opportunity. Go to the next slide, please. And before we get into smart solar and what that is, I just want to share a little bit about AFT. We are a national nonprofit founded in 1980 and really involved with the modern farmland conservation movement. We are the only national organization that takes a really holistic approach to agriculture, and we focus really on 3 interconnected priorities: protecting farmland, keeping farmers on the land, and promoting sound farming practices. These three pillars really shape our mission, which is saving the land that sustains us. And those pillars, an overall mission really just support all these other outcomes that we rely on. Um, AFT launched its Smart Solar Initiative in 2021 to help guide solar development in a manner that really maximizes benefits to farming communities. And it's grounded in those three pillars of the land, the people, and the practices. But Smart Solar really provides a framework for getting solar development right rather than simply arguing for or against it. We do need both renewable energy and thriving farms and ranches. So to guide our work and are these four smart solar principles. We do acknowledge that these will look different around the country. But the first one is prioritizing solar siting on buildings and land not well suited for farming, unless that is agrivoltaics. So this is supporting solar energy development on rooftops, carports, brownfields, and other land not well suited for agriculture to really help minimize the impacts of solar energy on our best agricultural land and farm businesses. The second one is, we understand that, we can't do it all on the built environment. So if energy is developed on farmland or ranch land, policies and practices should be in place to protect, not only soil health, but ensure the future access to water, especially during construction and decommissioning, to ensure opportunities for farming in the future. The third one, we define agrivoltaics as the intentional combination of solar energy generation and active ag production with a marketable ag product on the same piece of land for the entire life of the project. We know this is possible. It's being done here in Texas and throughout the country. But really to be successful, appropriate planning has to be undertaken from the beginning. And the fourth, farmers in rural communities should benefit from this development. There must be inclusive stakeholder engagement to really ensure that projects strengthen farm viability and reflect farmers' interest, including producers that face barriers to accessing land and other resources. And you can go to the next slide, please. So what that looks like here on the ground in Texas, we conducted a solar survey and follow-up about a year and a half ago to really understand ag producers and landowners' perspectives related to this movement of ag and on solar on solar on ag land. This really has helped inform and guide our work and identify gaps. So one of these was we found out through our survey was those that were interested in solar leasing overwhelmingly supported agrivoltaics. But despite this support, they mentioned a lack of information and trusted sources on this topic. So we kicked off an agrivoltaics training for ag and conservation professionals to help build their capacity to support landowners interested in integrating ag production within these solar installations. So we kicked off that cohort in March of this year, and we have just over 30 participants from Extension, different water districts, land trust, and other nonprofit and small farm and ranch organizations. We're also collaborating with the National Lab of the Rockies, formerly known as NREL, through their agri-tech program that provides free technical assistance and helps participants advance agrivoltaic projects from early development through long-term operations. And finally, AFT's technical consulting arm is called Prosperity Partners. We're helping farmers, landowners, and solar developers design and implement projects around the country that strengthen both ag and conservation on these solar sites. And the last one. And yeah, so thank you. And if you have additional questions after the webinar today and our discussion, feel free to reach out to me directly or check out our website. Thank you.
Thanks, Garrett. Next up, we have Dr. Cyrus Reed, the Conservation Director of the Lone Star chapter of the Sierra Club.
Thanks, Luke. And if you have any medical problems, do not consult me because I'm not a medical doctor. Um, First of all, I wanted to thank Environment Texas and the great report. Thanks, Quentin. It's a really good report. We're very supportive of it. I'm the Legislative and Conservation Director of the Sierra Club, the Texas chapter. Uh, and I wanted to start with this chart because this is what's expected. This is what we expect to have happen based on within ERCOT, our main grid, what's coming down the pike. And this is from a recent ERCOT report, and it's showing that there will likely be some additional gas resources, some additional wind resources, about 10 gigawatts worth, but especially solar and batteries. And we're expecting if all these, projects actually get built, it could, double the amount of solar and storage coming online in the next 4 to 5 years. That's a tremendous amount of solar and storage. There's some good in that, but there's also some worries about where it will be located and how we'll develop so that we can do as the report suggests, balance the need for energy with the balance to also protect our lands and our peoples. So next slide, please. Um, Quentin, this is not meant to contradict what you said, but I believe that Texas is now number one in solar, and to be clear, that's utility scale solar, at least the capacity, and number one in storage. And again, that's actually in capacity. And we've done that through some smart state policy. We first passed a renewable portfolio standard back in 1999 as part of the deregulation bill, and it had a very modest goal, which we easily met. We then expanded that goal in 2005 and also built some additional transmission in West Texas through the competitive renewable energy zones. We easily met the goals that were in that bill, SB 20. And then in 2015, we got rid of the goals and ultimately the ability to do new transmission like the CREZ because frankly, the state was doing well and we didn't really need those goals anymore. The market was taking care of it. So today we are number one in wind. In terms of utility scale solar, we're number one, although I think we're slightly behind California if you also consider distributed solar. And we're number one in storage, slightly ahead of California, although in terms of megawatt hours, because they have long duration storage, they actually beat us. But we're getting there. So that's exciting news. Next slide, Luke. On if you go to the ERCOT website and you look at their all of their data, you can get to this slide, and this was from sometime last week. But on most days now, solar plus batteries plus wind are providing somewhere around 45% of the electricity needs. And the big change has been we used to really worry in Texas just a few years ago about the hot afternoons, the summer hot afternoons, and would we have enough juice on the grid to provide all of our needs? We don't really worry about that so much more because of all the solar development. Now we worry more about the evenings where, batteries are really playing a role in coming on. And then obviously in the winter time as well, and in the kind of morning, the cold winter mornings when we don't have a lot of sun and the wind's dying off, we worry about those periods. And that's why, batteries have become so important. If you'll go to the next slide, Luke. This is really building on what Quentin already said, which is there's a number of studies out that show that this renewable energy development and particularly recently solar have really helped keep costs down, even though we know electricity costs and transmission costs are going up. If it weren't for this renewable energy development, we'd be paying much more. A recent study found it comes out to about $200 per year on the average residential consumer bill that folks are saving because of these lower electricity prices. But we're also reducing pollution. There is a required report that's put out by Texas A&M's Energy Systems Lab that looks at all the renewable development and all the energy efficiency programs we have. And it shows that in particular, renewable development is helping reduce the amount of NOx emissions, which are coming from fossil fuels because of renewable energy. And therefore, while we still have obviously parts of the state that do have high smog levels, high pollution. It would be a lot worse if it weren't for the renewable energy that's coming online. And also, obviously, there have been revenues for landowners because virtually all of our wind and solar development is on private land. That means that involves revenues for those Texas communities. And in addition, very importantly, given our long-term drought that we seem to be facing, these wind and solar do not require maybe a little bit of water for cleaning, but generally they don't require water, and batteries use very little. And so that's a huge amount of water that we're saving. That if we were using only gas, coal, and nuclear, obviously we'd be using a lot more water. So those are all good things. And if you can go to the next slide, Luke. Um, this has all been positive for Texas, but you guys saw the first graph. If we're going to double solar and battery development and significantly increase wind, we're going to need to have some common sense protections and transparency going forward. It's interesting. I'm sure Luke has the same situation, or Lisa for that matter. You work for a conservation organization, and there are sometimes tensions inherent. We have a local group in the East Texas, Piney Woods, Big Thicket region. They've been very active on conservation issues. They were pretty upset when Entergy Texas came forward with some proposals, and I want to say it was Hardin County and another county, I think it was Polk, about the location of the proposed solar facilities. And their big beef was we shouldn't be locating solar in areas that are heavily wooded or that are near the headwaters of major tributaries because it could lead to additional flooding risk. And it says solar erosion, says should say soil erosion, and potentially impact some important habitats. And one of the issues, and I know we're facing this in data centers, but the same is true with solar development, and Garrett mentioned this as well, is just that community outreach, just the fact communities get upset when they learn about a project after it's already being constructed. So making sure folks are aware of projects and able to have some kind of input and transparency on the information is extremely important. And that's why we're supportive of the report and the call for best practices on construction management and siting. But also, in our view, we need better transparency and community relations going forward. It's one thing, 20 years ago when it was just a few wind projects here and there, that was one reality, but now we're in a different reality, and we probably need better rules and guidelines along those issues. And if you'll go to the next slide, Luke. Um, some of the thing, this isn't necessarily in the report, but we would also be supportive, in addition to the recommendations in the report, just about some good neighbor and transparency requirements. Things like providing notice to nearby landowners, providing a sign on site that describes what the proposal is and how to get more information, making sure the developers have a website where they've got that information, and that website is maintained both before construction begins and also after the project is operational, and providing information, but also how to give input with the developers or request some kind of a public meeting would be important. And finally, and Garrett kind of hinted at this or mentioned it, in some cases, we need community benefit agreements. We need agreements on how these plants are going to operate. Are they going to contribute, either to habitat restoration or make up for, help mitigate some of the impact they will have. And then also, finally, the PUC has done a great job in recent years getting more information online, but just having a public portal for all proposed or existing generation resources, basic information, and also some link to the project developer's website so that we, the public, can learn about these projects. And if we choose to, interact with the developer and in some ways try to influence it. And if you can go to the next slide. I don't know if I have additional slides.
I think that's it.
That was it. And we do support the recommendations of the report, and we'll talk about that at the end. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Cyrus. Next up, we have Stacy Ortego with the National Wildlife Federation.
Thanks, Luke. Hi, everyone. My name's Stacy Ortico. I'm the Gulf of Mexico campaign manager on the Offshore Wind Energy Program at National Wildlife Federation. And I want to talk a little bit about kind of why a group like NWF is focused on offshore wind. Obviously, as I'm sure everybody on the call knows, we consider climate change the biggest threat to wildlife. But we've been involved in the offshore wind space for well over a decade, since before the first turbines were installed off of the coast of Rhode Island. If you go to the next slide, Luke, when we're advocating for offshore wind, primarily, every time we're talking about this, it's about supporting the responsible development. And NWF's thought, pretty hard about what exactly that means to us. So you can see this kind of 6 parts of that definition of what we consider responsible development. So if we're talking about best practices, that's trying to implement all of these things for every project. So obviously the first and foremost will be following what we call a mitigation hierarchy, which means you want to first avoid impacts to whatever degree possible. Whatever can't be completely avoided, then you minimize, then you further, mitigate those impacts. And obviously, monitoring and adaptive management as time goes on. And then other parts of this definition is just considering other uses in the ocean, consulting Native American tribes and communities, engaging with state and local governments, reducing or completely avoiding, if possible, negative impacts to underserved communities, which have really bore the brunt of our energy industry thus far. So we don't want to make those same mistakes with any of these newer industries. And then using the best available science. So when we know better, do better. As more information comes along, adapt along the way, make decisions based on that science. Next slide. And because offshore wind is a little bit newer for the US and we don't have that off of Texas yet, I wanted to briefly give just a little background on the status in the US. So right now there's only 4 projects that are fully completed. 2 of those were really pilot projects, so basically proof of concepts. Very few turbines. That was really just to prove the technology. And then you can see the number of turbines start to get a little larger. South Fork Wind had 12, Vineyard Wind 62. That's really starting to get more at scale. And the next slide, there's 4 projects currently under construction. So by the end of next year, we should have all 4 of these done. So by then there will be 8 fully constructed projects. And if you look at the number of turbines, you can see on these projects that, it's really starting to scale up. So you have, 54, 65, 84 turbines. And then the coastal Virginia offshore wind is going to be the largest with 176 turbines. And just to kind of show that on a map on the next slide, just shows where all 8 of these will be located. So this is obviously the eastern seaboard from Rhode Island down to Virginia. So 4 completed, 4 currently under construction. And the next slide. And so just touching on Texas, like I said, Texas doesn't have any offshore wind projects at the moment. But what this map here shows is that blue section is off the coast of Louisiana. So that is the only current lease in the Gulf. And that project is only the lease. So they're not working on any permitting right now. So we're still years away from any projects being off the Texas coast. But you can see some of these other blocks in that map were areas that were being considered to have lease areas. And although there's no projects yet off the Texas coast, Texas has been very involved in the supply chain. So the 2 little photos there on the left of the slide, that first one is a wind turbine installation vessel. So this was constructed in Brownsville, Texas, and that is currently installing turbines on the coastal Virginia offshore wind project. So that's that really large project off of Virginia. And then that photo on the right is an offshore wind substation that was constructed in Ingleside and Corpus Christi. That is servicing the South Fork Wind Farm that's delivering power to New York. And next slide. And so what I really wanted to spend more of the time talking about for the purpose of this webinar is kind of reducing impacts and for wildlife. And one of those species of concern is the rhesus whale. So you can see this blue area in the Gulf is the known habitat for rhesus whales. They're very critically endangered. There are fewer than 100 individuals remaining. So if there's a loss of one individual, that can be pretty detrimental to the population of that small of a size. And the column to the right there shows some key threats. So there's, obviously vessel strikes, ocean noise, oil spills, marine debris, obviously climate change, and fishing gear entanglement. And so one of the key things to reduce some of these impacts, like I said, what we call that mitigation hierarchy, is first avoiding impacts to the degree possible. And so NWF, was very pleased with the process of selecting the areas that could potentially have leases in the Gulf. The Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, which is the federal agency that handles leasing in the Gulf for energy production. The orange kind of oval shape along the coast, that is the area where on my previous slide that had those potential areas for development, that's the area that falls in. So you can see that falls out of the known habitat for rhesus whales. So we were very pleased with that. And on the next slide, I'll show just a couple other examples of mitigation strategies. So obviously the first thing is responsible siting. So making sure we can avoid areas that are sensitive habitat to the degree possible, which they've done for rhesus whales. And the bubble curtains on the left, what that is basically these rings of releases compressed air. So if you think of a jacuzzi releasing a lot of bubbles, that's kind of what this does. And what that's used for is during pile driving, when they're putting those monopiles into the seabed, that makes a lot of noise, which can impact marine life. And so those bubble curtains, essentially, it's a double bubble curtain. So you can see there's kind of two rings of bubbles in the water there. And what that does is dampen the noise so that the sound doesn't travel as far out. And then seasonal restrictions. So that's, preventing pile driving during certain times of the year where you're more likely to have congregations of marine life. So maybe there's timing as well. So pausing construction. So that coastal Virginia offshore wind project actually in I think November 2024, there was a pause during the North Atlantic right whale migration. That way they weren't reducing the likelihood of having impacts with wildlife. And there's vessel speed restrictions, pretty common across the board for these projects are, about 10 knots. We encourage, even slower if you see stuff like floating vegetation mats or jellyfish aggregations, which could attract more sea turtles. So implementing those vessel speed restrictions is important. And then increasing blade visibility. So for some of this, it could be as simple as painting a blade a different color. That way it's a little more visible to birds. And you could have lighting that doesn't turn on until aircraft is detected. So rather than having lighting on 24/7. So those are some methods to try to reduce impacts to wildlife. And then protected species observers. So having people on board, ideally 4 protected species observers per vessel. That way they can look out, across the entire horizon. And then implementing measures if species are detected. So whether that's, slowing down for the vessel speed restriction or stopping construction if a species of concern is present. So these are all kind of some measures that can be implemented. And a lot of these are currently being implemented on projects that are currently in construction on the East Coast. So when NWF is working on comments, whenever we've commented on all these projects that have been that are under construction right now, we are encouraging the use of all of these things too. And in addition, just there's also for like fisheries, making sure there's some transit lanes, and there will be access to the turbine areas for fishing whenever outside of the construction zones. So usually whenever they're constructing, there's obviously some zone restrictions, but then there's access after that. There's actually a next week, I believe there is a fishing tournament off of Block Island, Rhode Island. So that's where that first project of the wind turbines is located. And then there's also benefits. So these structures obviously can serve as artificial reefs as well. So there's some benefits there, but obviously all energy production, even the greener forms of energy, can have impacts. So we monitor that and make sure that we're advocating for some of these measures to be taken in these projects. I think that's my last slide there. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Stacy. So, we've seen that there are many best practices available to help minimize the impact. And I think it's clear that just draconian siting standards are not the answer. We've seen the last few legislative sessions, a number of bills to either dramatically restrict or even outright ban renewable energy pass the Texas Senate. And that would not help the environment. That would mean more air pollution, more water use, more toxic waste from oil waste pits and orphan wells and coal ash ponds. And so we need to instead, really emphasize policy that builds on the best practices that are out there, including, acoustic surveys, before construction to identify, high use bird and bat corridors, avoiding sensitive areas and dark sky communities, curtailing wind turbines during high risk seasons, deterrent technology like ultrasonic acoustic emitters, like we're seeing here, where the bat being deterred from the wind turbine, much like your eyes might be deterred from this slide because of the flashing GIF. And then finally, agrivoltaics, as Garrett talked about. So and instead, I think what we need, are, clear rules of the road that will help both developers and the public know, what can be done and what can't be done. They need to be science-based standards that, emphasize, stewardship of our land and wildlife while respecting, the rights of the landowners who, are helping keep those lands intact. We need to set clear floors and ceilings, for local governments to help them avoid, outright bans, but also setting some minimum standards in place. We think that there should be consultation with Texas Parks and Wildlife, a tiered review process where projects that are in highly sensitive areas get the highest level of scrutiny from Parks and Wildlife, whereas projects that might be in built on previously disturbed lands might have a faster path to move forward. And then finally, we think reasonable setbacks as well as light and noise standards are also smart policy as well. So to learn more, you can read the report, which is available on our website, environmenttexascenter.org. Just scroll down to the bottom and you'll see it as the featured report. And we're happy now to take any questions. And I see we have one both in the chat, and I think maybe there's a Q&A as well. You can use either one. But Eric asks, are there more data on the single blade painting on wind turbines to show it is effective to prevent bird strikes? The most advertised tests I've seen only involved a few turbines in a relatively short duration. I don't know if Lisa or Stacy might be able to answer that.
I could just jump in by saying I'm not aware of any large scale testing of that technology yet in the US or in Texas. I think some of the most exciting results that we're seeing are actually coming out of Europe. So there's a lot of opportunity to apply that kind of technology, as simple as it seems, here in the States and test its effectiveness.
Yeah, and I can I'm sure Luke will share the slides after that has our contact info, but I can see if there's some direct information I can send you. But like Lisa said, I don't think there is in the US. This would probably be, some studies from Europe, but we can definitely kind of dig in and see if there's some information I can email you after this call.
Great, thanks, y'all. Any other questions? Let's see. Oh, why am I raising my hand? Okay, well, I think that's all we have then. So thank you. Oh, we've got a question from Jeffrey. You want to go ahead and put it in the Q&A? Okay. Jeffrey says, appreciate the focus on agrivoltaics and wind farm development. I live in central Austin, see lots of sprawling surface parking lots that seem like good places for large solar installation. So who wants to take that? Cyrus, you want to take that?
Well, I would just say, and maybe Garrett will add. I mean, I sort of agreed with his opening statement that, one great place to look for solar first is rooftops and parking lots, and particularly in, city areas. And so there's been some projects done both by CPS in San Antonio with parking lots, and Austin Energy's now been looking more at municipal buildings and other places to put solar, and it makes a lot of sense, right? Where you already have disturbed land that's already been developed, why not add solar to it? And I think that's great, and we should do that. I don't know that though the scale of growth we have in Texas. There have been some studies that says if you were to, cover every rooftop and every parking lot, we could get all the energy we needed, right? But that's pretty unlikely, given, land costs and other things. But I think I agree, there's a lot more we could be doing within cities on parking lots and on buildings. Warehouses would be another great area to put more solar on. And I know, Luke, we've worked in the past to get it to get folks like Target and Walmart and HEB to be doing more on solar because they have a large space, that are permanently occupied where we could be adding solar. So agree with the commenter. Let's work on that as well.
Yeah, agreed. And yeah, I think we should absolutely do as much as we can on that side. The studies I've seen have found that even if we maximize the entire technical potential of every rooftop, it would still only get us about a third of the electricity that we currently use in the United States. And so it's really a yes and, but it can't replace. If we want to get to 100% clean energy, we need utility scale renewables too. Okay, next question is, are there currently no requirements for developers to provide notice to nearby landowners and signage about proposed developments? Cyrus?
There really aren't, unless it's a situation where the developer is seeking, some sort of incentive, like, an abatement, a property tax abatement, where there would be a public hearing. There really isn't currently in statute a requirement that you have signage or provide notice. The one area I'm thinking about, I'm wondering if there is a requirement, is they are required to get usually a stormwater, management permit from TCQ, and I'm not sure what the rules are on notice in that case. Let me check on that, but I think it's generally true there isn't currently a requirement for signage or notice, and we think there should be.
I'm also going to put in the Q&A, or I'll put it in the chat, I guess, a link to a study that Environment America put out that answers that question around, the technical potential for rooftop solar versus and other technologies. So from overall perspective, solar could many times meet the current and projected demand for electricity in the future. But rooftop solar again is only about a third or less than that. So let's me double check. There's no other questions. Oh yeah, are there any incentives available to commercial developers for this type of construction? Yes.
I know so just to jump in real quick, following up on Jeffrey's talk about Austin, I know they just increased when a lot of places are doing away with their incentives, July 1st, Austin actually just extended and expanded their residential and commercial incentives for solar. So definitely something to look into.
That's right. And there were, oh, go ahead, Cyrus.
I was going to say, under Texas law, the major private utilities, in other words, the transmission and distribution utilities, have to provide some amount of funding, and it's ultimately paid by ratepayers, for energy savings programs. And some of those utilities now do offer residential and commercial incentives for solar. Some of them do, some of them don't. So Encore has one now. Encore has recently, I think this is a good idea. They're only offering that incentive for solar if you pair it with batteries. And the idea is they also want to, increase the resiliency of the system. But there are other utilities, again, There are 8 utilities, and some of them have programs and some don't. So it is what it is.
And of course, there were federal tax incentives, both on the residential and commercial, as well as the utility scale side. But with the one big beautiful bill, the residential and commercial, I think, are already gone, and the utility scale, I think, just expired. I think like 2 weeks ago, right? Was the last time you could get into. So, the biggest incentives that have been available for encouraging solar development on rooftops, unfortunately, is now gone. All right. Well, we are almost at the end of the hour, and it looks like we're finished most of the questions. So thank you all for joining us. We will have a recording of this as well as the slides posted on our website. We'll email a link out to that. So feel free to share that with others. And if you have questions for any of the panelists, feel free to reach out to me. You should have my email, and happy to get an answer to you. So thank you so much.